I would first like to talk a little bit about, the conditions that we are living in right now in Sri Lanka, and also then move on to talk about, as a member of the Human Rights Commission, some of the initiatives that the Human Rights Commission has taken with regards to addressing social and economic rights, and particularly with regards to women and social and economic rights. Now, we talked about, Jayati addressed the fact that we are in this huge global crisis as a result of Trump. But we, of course, have been in crisis with regards to our economy for a while now. And we have, as Jyoti also mentioned, this wonderful government that, is arguably the most sort of people-friendly government that we have had in a long time. But we are also having to deal with the fact that this government that we are so appreciative and can be considered people-friendly is also choosing, with regards to the economy, to take a direction that is not necessarily people-friendly, right? The commitment to the IMF framework, we saw with regards to the budget itself, the government's interest in sort of social protections, in looking at the most vulnerable in the country, women, the disabled, really excellent sort of like categories to target within the budget, but also, given the restrictions that are posed by the IMF, the amount, the quantity that can be allocated is really small, and whether it will actually make a difference is unclear. And also what is being conveyed by the government's commitment to the IMF project is also that, substantial changes in ways the economy is organized, as Jayati suggested for us that we should think about, are not going to be really possible under the framework that the government has committed to. Right? We are committed to a neoliberal project with a government that is ostensibly committed to a people-friendly way of governing. So, the contradictions of that project are soon going to appear, I'm sure, and also when we start having to repay our debts, which is not too far in the future, I worry about what that might mean for us. But of course, we must appreciate what the government, leaves open for us. After 1948, we suddenly have a twofold increase in women's representation. We have a female prime minister. We have really competent and smart young women speaking up in parliament, really unheard of developments in this country, right? And also the commitment that the government has shown to people-friendly policies and all of that, I think we really need to capitalize upon, particularly with regard to, say, the changes in the law, for instance, right? There are many laws that need to be changed. I'm not going to talk too much about the Prevention of Terrorism Act. In addition to the Prevention of Terrorism Act, there are other things. I'm particularly interested in the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, but also maybe labor laws that the government was talking about, the previous government was talking about, really egregious. We can have better thought through labor laws, better regulation of credit, for instance, that we can push the government to engage in. So those are all things I think that we need to ensure that we get done while this government is in power. Yes, so with regards to the Human Rights Commission, we have, of course, given the context of the economic crisis, foregrounded the importance of economic and social rights. Now, in 2016, when the Commission was under the leadership of Dr. Deepika Udugamma, they made representations to the consultation process for a new constitution to include social and economic rights in the constitution. This Commission has also taken on, the task of looking at the possibility of supporting such a measure, and we are talking about it. Now, in addition, we have emphasized the importance of particularly social and economic rights as they impact on women through our International Women's Day programs twice now. At the first program, we had feminist economists speaking, and also many activists who, some of whom are present here, speaking at the event. And this year we had Sarala Emanuel speaking on issues of microcredit. So we, are constantly committed to ensuring that social and economic rights are at the sort of forefront of the engagement that the Human Rights Commission engages in. So given my own background in sort of research, we are also committed to doing work that highlights vulnerable communities and the impact that they are facing as a result of the economic crisis. And the next part of my presentation will be well, it's right here, the rights violations of manpower workers in the free trade zones, research that we conducted last year, and I will read the recommendations as well, which we hope to take forward by engaging with local state institutions that can make a sort of substantial impact onto people's lives. So one of the strengths of the Human Rights Commission is its access to state institutions and its ability to coordinate with state institutions and ensure that certain sort of issues that have fallen through the cracks, for instance, are taken forward. And I'm hoping that you will see while I go through the presentation that is some things that we are planning to do. So I won't spend too much time talking about the free trade zones. The manpower work so the Human Rights Commission was really interested. I'm sorry, this is really distracting me, the mics. Yeah. So the Human Rights Commission was really interested in the issue of manpower workers because we had found several instances where, there have been sort of accidents involving workers for which there seemed to be no institutions being held responsible due to the fact that they are manpower workers, and the category of manpower workers is becoming sort of common for usage among state institutions as well as private institutions, and this is something that we are looking at. So our research project targeted the free trade zones of Katunayaka and Biyagama, and we looked at it according to these categories. We particularly looked at the labor laws and the BOI guidelines, which are sort of thought to be insufficient, but we found that they were actually not. It was just that the commitment to seeing them through was not as great. So with regards to our methodology, we did observation visits, visits to boarding houses where people were housed. We did focus group discussions with manpower workers, also with state institutions, Labour Department, Board of Investment, Ministry of Industries, Ministry of Women and Child Affairs and Social Empowerment. Then service providers in Katunayaka and Biyagama. We talked to the Divisional Secretariats, Ministry of Health and Police. Next one. So with regards to our findings, so the labour management and outsourcing, with regards to the circulars of the BOI, it states very clearly that the companies must hire directly, but of course that has completely shifted now. Unskilled workers are mainly managed by manpower worker agencies, and some skilled workers are also considered to be manpower workers, but these are not managed by many of the agencies that we spoke to, but under really sort of problematic conditions that I will come to in a second. Now, according to the Labour Department, manpower agencies can choose to register or not choose to register. This is a very problematic kind of definition of manpower agencies as not coming under any kind of regulatory authority. And also, there are all these sort of processes, like for instance, they are supposed to have a background check, but again, this is not compulsory. So there are increased number of manpower agencies and nobody has a real idea as to how many there are and who they are registered with, and clearly some are not registered. But of course, the problem is that there exists a law, the Fee Charging Employment Agencies Act of 1956, under which agencies can be required to register. Now, the Department of Labour is not utilizing it, and the Human Rights Commission plans to engage with the Department of Labour to ensure or to consider what can be done with regards to manpower agencies that don't register. Now, the daily recruitment process is hugely precarious. Interactions with agents. We went at 5 o'clock in the morning to the gates of the free trade zones, and you could see the interaction between the manpower workers and the agency representatives. Hugely problematic, minimal information shared. The guys go around collecting people's identity cards. Now, there is no sort of paper exchange in any way, so it is only verbal, and people are told certain things, and then they go with these people. Even the locations of some of the places that they're going to are not previously discussed, right? Workers are frequently assigned to job locations that are 2 hours away, and sort of compensation for the time that it takes for them to go to these places is not discussed. Like I said, there's no written documentation engaged with any of the workers. Verbal communication, often inconsistencies. Tasks can differ from what is initially agreed upon. And there are deductions made for food and travel and etc. that the workers are not initially informed about, and they feel completely sort of like taken aback when they are confronted with the charges. Then, for day work, apparently the amount that a person gets to their hand is greater than if they were sort of day wage laborers who actually collected their money at the end and have deductions for pensions and for services and things like that. But the day wage laborers are supposed to get all of that in their pay packet, but generally what they understand is that the manpower agencies reduce much more than they are actually supposed to. So factories are very committed to the manpower worker recruitment process due to sort of the economic crisis and the lack of sort of steady orders and things like that. But temporary workers often experience different treatment than permanent workers. Then companies often promise permanent work but do not deliver. I mean, they're supposed to work for 6 months, but even after 6 months, they're not made permanent. Temporary workers are generally assigned very hazardous tasks, and for hazardous tasks, temporary workers are preferred. Protective gear issues are constant, and we encountered many about protective gear. No health insurance for temporary workers, and some of the agencies that we spoke to were really not, committed to providing any kind of health care. We encountered this one person who had a really serious accident while working as a manpower worker. So the management took him to the hospital and saw that he was admitted, but that was it. He was paid 1 day's work, wages, and left to sort of take care of himself after. So he said that he was left at the hospital and the Mahat talked to him for 1 day, and that was it, basically. There was no follow-up to see if he was okay or anything like that. Lack of washroom facilities, privacy to change, workloads, insufficient safety equipment, all of that was talked about. Also, there was a clear rise in depression, reported suicides, substance abuse among workers, and this was linked to the conditions as well as sort of the deteriorating economic crisis-related situation. So economic crisis severely impacted manpower workers, leading to food insecurity, huge problem, with many unable to afford 3 meals a day. Workers earn around 15 to 20,000 rupees, which is insufficient for food, and it's almost half their daily wages gone for food. Their assets, any tiny assets that they have, like gold, for instance, is disposed of on a regular basis to cover daily expenses. Temporary workers, we found, are less aware of their labor rights than permanent workers. Unskilled labor from rural areas are actually recruited by manpower agencies. We also noted an interesting thing, which was that, manpower workers are really sort of strapped with regards to childcare and provision of resources for children. At one point, we asked them about what you do for leisure, right, at the end of sort of a conversation, and they just looked at us, and some were like, we don't even know what that means. Challenges faced by female workers, yes, thank you. Many single mothers work as manpower workers and face huge challenges with a lack of support from family and obviously partners. Mothers cannot afford daycare very many instances, and they leave children alone in unsafe boarding houses with neighbors supposedly to take care of them. Age restrictions in daycare centers in the zones meant that 10-year-olds couldn't be sent to the daycare anymore. Many daycare centers themselves were really badly serviced and over capacity. There is some support from, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, the police, etc., Women and Children's Desk, night patrols, 24 hotline for gender-based violence, etc. But almost all service providers routinely spoke about the women as overly sexual and having most of their problems related to relationship issues, right? Yeah. So then the ministry, the Ministry of Women and Children, Child Affairs, we asked them, there's this very captive sort of female population. What are you doing? What are the services that you're providing? How are you sort of addressing this issue? And they had no specific programs other than the sort of the gender-based violence programming that they did across the country. Many workers live in these boarding houses. Next one, please. Yeah. Boarding houses which have developed around the zones. And interestingly, the researcher who wrote up the, Amara Nilafti wrote the report, we were discussing how actually the housing that was built, there are rooms in a line, long rooms in a line, right? And she started referring to them without really thinking about it as line rooms, right? So I thought it was a really interesting development with regards to, the exploitation of labor in different locations, right? These rooms are smaller even than the line rooms on the plantations that she was referencing. Cooking facilities are limited. Occupants use firewood or gas cookers. Inside rooms with poor ventilation, very small window. Cramped conditions. Showering areas offer limited privacy. Showering areas are public. And there's no separation between female and male bathing areas. Wells are poorly maintained. Clean water is a huge problem, and there's a constant risk of contamination. Relationship between workers and the state. Manpower workers will have limited contact with the state, we found, and receiving state services was really not constant. They rely on the Gramaniladari or the monk in the area for letters to get their children into schools, for instance, and for sometimes when work enrollment permits were needed. Boarding owners, the people who ran those line rooms, are required to register with, even if they're temporary residents, with the Gramaniladari and the police, but this is not often done. And so there's a number of workers, it's not clear how many. And, there was a huge issue with regards to ration supplying during COVID because there was no clear number. So that was, many people didn't receive because of the, provision was not adequate. So many still have voter registration in their hometowns and not in the places that they have been living for years. And this is not just for manpower workers, but all for permanent workers as well in the zones. And so they basically don't exercise their right to vote. Some residents have, yes, next one, okay. Despite harsh conditions, many manpower workers said that they appreciate or value the availability of employment opportunities, citing lack of alternatives. Workers from various provinces relocate with family members to take up jobs together in certain instances, we noticed. And we also encountered sort of skilled workers introducing their children also to work in the free trade zones. The children worked sometimes as manpower workers and with the expectation of permanent employment, and sometimes they worked as manpower workers for a long time. A large number of youth, we noticed, worked as manpower workers. Many have not completed secondary school and have no skills. Some youth view manpower work as a stepping stone with aspirations to secure permanent jobs, or they work while attending further education. Okay, next one. Couple more. Go. The next one also. Just a few recommendations. Now, given that the Human Rights Commission has access to these state institutions and we can sort of pressurize them to do certain things, we tend to sort of like design our recommendations directly to institutions, right? So very high risk of water in toilet, drainage lines, etc., mixing with drinking water. So we are asking that the national urgently provide pipe-borne water and look into drainage issues. Then facilities for pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, Department of Labor, BOI, and Ministry of Health to provide greater facilities. Next one. We were told that some of these features were not offered to all of the workers and not only to some permanent workers. So these are the recommendations with regards to that. Next one. So with regards to addressing the concerns of manpower workers in terms of payment, loss of ID card and all of that, we thought that if there was a dedicated duty officer in the divisional secretariats, in the Department of Labor and the Ministry of Women's Affairs to look at manpower worker issues, that would be a good development in terms of support. Next one. So we asked for conducting sort of checks on the boarding houses that house these workers, not just the manpower workers, the permanent workers as well, by the Ministry of Health and the local government authorities to ensure that, some standards are maintained, because these are sort of boarding houses that are charging the people to live there. With regards to the disaster management process, we wanted the Ministry of Disaster Management and the divisional secretariats to include temporary residents in headcounts during disaster situations and integrate temporary residence data into the disaster management record keeping process. There's of course the number issue of people who run boardings not reporting. That is something that we can't address here, but that was also a huge problem. Next one, please. Now, with regards to manpower workers, there is no record keeping of manpower workers by any institution that employs them. So the BOI was also very easily able to say that it is not their responsibility, and even the sort of the registered, well-established manpower agencies who took pride in their professionalism told us that with regards to the day workers, they didn't maintain any records. So this is a recommendation that the manpower labor supply agencies maintain records of the temporary workers as well. About improving awareness among manpower workers about their rights, responsible institutions are named. Okay, next one. Midterm recommendations. Yeah, next one. So, registration. I think this is a hugely important issue. Manpower worker agencies are not registered, and we will be pressurizing the Department of Labor to ensure that manpower worker agencies are registered under the Fee Charging Employment Agencies Act. Next. Right, okay. Okay, next one. So registering manpower workers, and another, I think I'll stop with this one. Another huge problem that we have with regards to manpower workers is that there is no information about them. So we wanted a process whereby they can be registered in a database, and there is some information when they go to different kinds of factories and all of that, and there is a record of their work that can be looked at when it is necessary, and for provision of maybe pensions and things like that, other kinds of services that can be provided, right? So yeah, so I'll stop with that. So we are intending to engage with the responsible state institutions to take these things forward. And, as the Human Rights Commission, we are able to do that, and hopefully there will be some positive outcomes from this. We also have this subcommittee process within the Human Rights Commission, from which we get certain sort of like suggestions to take forward these kinds of representations, and I can speak more about that if necessary at tea or something. Okay, thank you very much.